Ladies and gentlemen, I said my prayers and I listened to a bunch of true crime shit just because I wanted to get in the mood here. And I've got the almost birthday boy with me as we discuss long legs. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new episode of Two Peas on a Podcast, where we review the latest and sometimes greatest movies every week. This week I have a special guest on the show. This is the last in the string of special guests of Nick's absence. At least I think so. He's supposed to be joining me again next week. Finally, he's coming back as we will be talking about the new Twisters film. However, this week, first time guest, which is honestly almost as shocking as the plot of Longlegs, that you've never been on the show. I mean, me and you kind of go way back, Stu. I don't know why we haven't had this crossover before, but Stu from Stu World Order is here. What's up, man? How are you? Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on. No, good day. Good to be on. I don't know why I haven't been on either. I talk to you all the time on Twitter. I talk to you all the time during the live stream for The Cure and all the work that you and Dan and Nick obviously put in on that. So thank you so much for having me on. I got to have you on my show upcoming. So we'll coordinate that too.
I'm all about it, man, and I'm glad you're finally here. Now, you pulled a doozy of a card to review this week in Longlegs, not only because of the substance of the movie itself, which we'll dive into, but just a lot of marketing for this film that I really actually praise pretty highly, regardless of what you think of the movie. And it's all anybody is thinking about in the film Twitterverse and in the cinephile world, definitely in the realm of horror. We've got a good summer of horror going. It's making a ton of money at the box office, especially for such a small budget. So Longlegs is the topic of conversation on a lot of shows last week and this week, and this is no exception. But I'm the horror guy, man. You see the sign behind me here. I'm the self-proclaimed horror guy, maybe, but we got to talk about it. So Longlegs from Osgood Perkins is the main review this week. However, Stu, before we get there, we like to start out every episode by heading over to social media and seeing what the fans had to ask us this week, as we call it One Big Question. All right, Stu, so over on the Discord chat, a mutual friend of ours, Julio from the Contrarians, you know that guy.
Oh, I love Julio.
I do too. He's a great dude. He says, does the presence of Nicolas Cage in a movie harm the marketing because it gives the audience the impression that the movie is likely going to be too campy, or does it help the marketing because people figure it's likely to be a fun watch, whether it's a train wreck or not? What do you think about Nick Cage's, without giving any spoilers on our thoughts of the film, how do you feel about his involvement in this project? In other words, did you think when you saw that he was in this as a serial killer, oh no, this is going to be too, Nick Cage, if you will? Or did you kind of look at it as a fun experiment?
I think it's become kind of a cyclical thing where for a long time in the 2010s and maybe even very early into the 2020s, if you saw Nicolas Cage was in a film, your curiosity was piqued because you were thinking, well, this could be a train wreck. But I would say from the late 2010s to the present day, his resume has padded so much that it's swung back the other way, where people are now like, oh, I'm recognizing that this guy is a good actor who's taken on a lot of, he's taken on a lot of choices. Let's put it that way. In the last several years, he's taken good choices and bad choices, but either way, even when he's taken bad choices, he swings for the fences in these movies. So you're going in expecting to see like, all right, what's he gonna do? But I think that that's a good connotation now, whereas 10 years ago, all right, what's Nicolas Cage gonna do now was a bad connotation. But I think the pendulum has swung back thanks to movies like Mandy and The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent and stuff like that, Color Out of Space. I think it's swung back where now people are like, all right, this guy is really doing some avant-garde shit. Am I going to like this?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you a little bit. I think that he's one of the very, very few actors that his name just elicits kind of an idea, just like over the top. And, Julio mentioned campiness, which I think is part of it too. But I also think that for the most part, I mean, of course, there's a few exceptions over the last, 30 to 40 years that the guy's been doing it. But for the most part, I feel like he does really care about the performance that he's giving, whether the movie turns out to be a piece of shit or not. Like, he always seems to take a lot of pride in the work that he does, and the guy loves movies. I mean, he's like a absolute just stellar kind of cheerleader for cinema, and that kind of comes through too in a lot of his performances. That he just wants to kind of do his best, and a lot of times that does hit us as like, oh man, that was so over the top. It was Nick Cage. You know, caging out is a phrase, you know, that's been coined because of a lot of the performances that he's given. The other one I'll ask you, which may or may not be an easy question for you, is from Jared Taylor, also a patron of the show over on Facebook. He says, what's your favorite Nicolas Cage performance? What comes to mind?
You know, all these years later, I think it's still Face Off. I think that what
All
he
right.
does in Face Off is so much fun. And Face Off is a movie that holds up to this day, both as a straight ahead movie that you're watching, and it holds up almost as a parody of itself, but not in a bad way. Not, I don't mean
Hmm.
that as an insult. I mean it, you can watch it and think that it's making fun of itself, winking at you, knowing what it's doing. And I
Right.
think it's just a really odd to say this about Face Off. I think it's a really smart movie. I think it's a ton of fun, and Cage is just absurd in it. I think that's my
Right.
favorite performance. That's my favorite movie of his.
That's a good one. That's a super self-aware performance and movie for sure. For me, it was always Raising Arizona, which is one of the early performances of his, and really when I was kind of introduced to him, aside from maybe Valley Girl, I may have seen prior to that, but that was really when I became a fan of his. And it was just a subtle, funny, like darkly humorous role where he was just kind of this buffoon, you know, falling into all these scenarios and has so many just, I just love that movie so much. Coen brothers early in their career. But what I was going to say is a very close runner up is very recent, a movie called Pig.
Okay.
I thought his quiet, really toned down, non cagey performance in that was one of those that really, it was the most surprising watch for me that year because just like we were just talking about, when you see Nicolas Cage on the header, on the poster, on the marquee, and you hear, oh, somebody stole his pig, he's out for revenge, right? So you
Yeah.
hear that and you think, oh, this is going to be, you know, he's going to be doing all kinds of crazy shit. But then you watch the movie and it's nothing like that. It was very a subversion of expectations and really kind of showed what he can do dramatically as an actor again because it had been a while since he kind of toned it down a little bit in that respect. So I think Pig and Raising Arizona are like 1 and 2 for me. They're pretty close. Did you see Pig, by the way, a few years ago when that came out?
I did. Pig is a movie that to me was half an hour too long. It was a 60-minute idea that they stretched out to full
Yeah.
90-minute feature length. I think I would have liked it a lot more if they had skimmed a lot of it down to 60 minutes. I like the subversiveness of the ending. I like his performance. I just thought like there was too much meandering around in it for me personally.
Yeah, I get it. It's definitely a slow movie, and again, because the plot line, you don't think that it's going to be that. You know what I mean? So it does kind of mess with you in that respect if you're expecting something when you go in and you get something really, frankly, as character piece really about his character. So, but those would be my two. So thank you guys for the questions and one big question this week. If you want to get involved, check the show notes. The Facebook fan group is available to join up over there. We also have a Discord chat, and of course, Patreon is for as little as $1. You can join up over there too and throw questions at us every week, and we will answer them on the show. Stu is my guest from Stu World Order, first time guest of the show, which is crazy, but he's here. And what a bit of homework you have to discuss Long Legs, directed by Osgood Perkins, starring Micah Monroe, and of course Nicolas Cage, as we were just talking about. Also, Blair Underwood, Alicia Witt, and a host of others. It is a kind of crime thriller, kind of this gritty horror adjacent thriller that has been coined as the scariest movie of the decade and one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. And I'm not going to name names on this review, but a lot of things were thrown out in addition to Neon's stellar marketing for the film that really had me hyped for this movie. Like between the months of like February and May, they would do these little 20 or 30 second teasers and they would release these really graphic kind of posters that were ambiguous, and it was an amazing marketing campaign. It really was. I mean, it really, as a horror fan, it got me salivating. I was like, I can't fucking wait to see this thing. Well, now I've seen it, and I want to talk to you about it, Stu. Now, before we get into the review, guys, we like to start out every episode by giving our score out of 10. Stu and I have not discussed it with each other, and I've actually been very, very quiet on social media about my reaction to this film. I saw it last Thursday, I believe, so it's been like 5 days since I saw it. I haven't said anything online about it. I just wanted to talk to you about it, and then once the episode's recorded, I'll start kind of letting people know what I thought of the film, because people have been asking me, and I'm like, just hang tight. I got to tell Stu before I tell anybody else. I got to make sure Stu's okay with my take before I start telling the world, you know. So we're going to give our scores out of 10, Stu. I'm going to count us in. It's what we call the early score reveal. 3, 2, 1. I got a 7 out of 10. And Stu is giving a 6 out of 10, a 6.0 out of 10 on long legs.
I'm used to decimaling everything, so
That's
I know you said you didn't
fine.
want decimals, but I still had to throw it in for the 6.0.
That's fine. We use it on the cumulative score, so that's a 6.5 overall from the P's this week on Long Legs. This will be spoiler-free for a few minutes, Stu, and then I'll let you know when we get into spoilers. You're the guest on the show, man. We got a serial killer, crime, drama, thriller kind of thing going on here. Osgood Perkins, he did the Black Coat's daughter, the pretty thing that lives in the house. He's got a very eerie kind of style of filmmaking, and that's no different in this movie. Real quick, a 6 is not a horrible score, but it's also not a really great score. So, spoiler-free, what's your general thoughts on Long Legs?
So my general thoughts are, with a 6, there's 2 different ways you could basically earn a 6. That you could start off in the 5 or 6 area range, and you could just kind of hover there. The direction's a 5 or a 6, the acting's a 5 out of 6, the 5 or a 6, the atmosphere's a 5 or a 6, and everything about the movie is just average or a little bit above average to me. Then there's what Longlegs did, where this movie is all over the map. There are aspects of this movie that I love, like aspects of the movie that I think are like a solid 8, 9, 10 out of 10. And then there are aspects of this movie that really just didn't work for me. And so this is more of like an average score, a cumulative score for me. If I'm taking everything about this movie all together, all the good stuff, all the bad stuff, and I'm smushing it all together and I'm averaging it out, it would come to about a 6 out of 10 for me, because the atmosphere is great. It really is an incredibly creepy movie. It is a movie that sticks with you, and it makes you uncomfortable. And the way it's shot, the direction is so good. And Micah Monroe's performance is really powerful. She's so emotionally vulnerable in this movie. You can tell what she's feeling at any given time. You can see what she's going through. But and this is obviously without getting into spoilers, it's kind of the problem that you had with Maxine on your Maxine episode. I thought the third act kind of fell off the floor for me. I wasn't a big fan of the third act of this movie. And we had talked about Nicolas Cage and what his performance means to a movie. This was honestly too comical for me. This was a Nicolas Cage performance that I couldn't take seriously, because he's shouting and he's yelling and he's singing, and it's Face Off Nicolas Cage, but in this movie where that performance doesn't belong. So for me, I didn't think this was, I don't want to say it wasn't a great performance. It was a performance that felt like it didn't belong in this movie. Whenever you have this character that he's playing, and the character just shouts out and does like random Nicolas Cage yelling and inflections with his voice, it just feels like, all right, now, despite all the makeup you're wearing, despite all the effects they have going on to transform you into this Longlegs character, all I hear if I shut my eyes and listen to you talk is Nicolas Cage.
Right. From something like Face Off. Yeah.
Yes.
For me, Stu, I'm going to need your help tonight, because what I want to do is I want to talk about the movie that we saw. And I say that because expectations were extremely heightened for me based on, aside from the marketing that we already talked about a little bit, based on some of the reactions from people that I respect, you know, high profile people in the film community, whatever, people that saw it at the festivals when it premiered like a long time ago, actually. I think it premiered like 4 or 5 months ago initially. So the reactions have been out there for quite a while. I ended up muting the term on Twitter, a bunch of the different things that were used to try to kind of get away from it because it was becoming, in my opinion, like too much even before I saw it with stuff that I mentioned to you about the scariest film of the decade and all this stuff. So I guess what I'm saying is that in this day and age, as a semi film critic as myself and a podcaster and somebody that loves movies, I want to go see this thing as if I'm seeing a movie like Seven in the '90s, And when I went to see that movie in the theater in '97 or whatever it was, I was in college. You wouldn't see the hype about people's reaction to that movie unless you read the newspaper, the literal paper, and you flip to the film column section and see what one dude had to say about it. Do you know what I mean? In your
Yeah.
town or whatever. And it's different now. I mean, everybody that goes to the theater, which for us in the community that we roll in, is a lot of people, and you start seeing comments like that, and you've agreed with those people in the past. You're like, oh wow, this. So I would say I say that just to merely point out that I think people kind of living off of the hype and the precursors going into seeing this movie are going to be disappointed. I think it's almost impossible to not at least have some level of disappointment when you see this movie for yourself if you've seen all of the very, very generous comments. Rotten Tomatoes was at 100% for a couple weeks. And it's a good movie. I mean, obviously I'm recommending it. I gave it a 7. But it's not the scariest film of the decade. It's not, in my opinion, it's nowhere near a movie like Silence of the Lambs in terms of quality. Of course, the influences are in the filmmaking, and we'll talk about that. I mean, she's basically playing Clarice Starling in this movie. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of things that work and that were obviously brought from influences that Perkins, had in his career and things that he watched growing up and stuff like that. But I'm talking about in terms of like quality, longevity, cultural impact. This is not Silence of the Lambs. This is not Seven. This is not even Zodiac, in my opinion, which is a film that I was also about a 7 out of 10 on. I think it's great, and I'm biased because I love David Fincher, but that's why I want to just review this, what we saw, what I watched. With that being said, when we get into spoilers, I'll talk about some of the problems I had with it, but most of those problems are in the last act, which is kind of what you were saying.
Yeah.
The Nicolas Cage performance, just to kind of touch on that without spoiling anything, I don't think it bothered me to the level that you're saying it bothered you, but I will say that when he was doing the T-Rex songs and he was belting out singing and mommy, daddy, and doing all that shit in the car, like I did hear Nicolas Cage. Like I wasn't like frightened, like, oh, this is a alien being that I'm not familiar with. Like I did feel like that was an over the top Cage character, and I'm kind of like what you said. I don't think it was a bad performance. Like I think he gave a great performance and he did what he wanted to do with that character. I think that unfortunately, unless you're talking about a role like in Pig, like we mentioned, any over the top zany kind of performance acting, that's just what people are going to think it is, because it's him. Now, let me ask you this before we go into spoilers, Stu. Had this Longlegs character been portrayed by an actor that you were not familiar with, by just like maybe a creepy looking dude, they find an actor that's kind of a unique look or whatever, and they do this prosthetic stuff on him, the script's the same, whatever, do you think that would have changed your impression of how that character was meant to be seen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not here to besmirch Nicolas Cage in this movie, but like I said, I couldn't get away from like, oh, this is Nicolas Cage. Okay.
Right.
So if this was somebody that I was not familiar with and they were doing all the same things, I think it would come across as creepier and less goofy / almost funny. And I mean, I say that like I chuckled during this movie, and this is not a movie that I think Osgood Perkins anticipated people chuckling during, but people in the theater laughed at scenes that with the what Nicolas Cage was doing. But I don't think that would be the case if it was an actor who wasn't Cage, if it was somebody that we weren't familiar with. I'm thinking like if 2010, before he really blew up, Paul Dano did this role. Like that would
Right.
be amazingly creepy. And I wouldn't think like, oh, it's Paul Dano if it's that early in his career, because I didn't know who he was until, the last several years.
Hmm.
But yeah, I could picture him doing this earlier in his career. But Nicolas Cage right here, right now, doing this performance, it took me out of the movie. And yeah, if it was an unknown, that wouldn't have happened. I think it would have come across as much creepier.
I wanted to ask you that because I was reflecting on it after, and like I said, I thought it was a good performance, but I did find myself kind of thinking like everything that the Longlegs character was doing and his mannerisms and obviously just the idea of stalking and abducting children. I mean, all that shit's scary and creepy and unsettling. So everything that was kind of on the page with this character is extremely frightening. If you encountered a guy like that in a snowy meadow and it's just you and him out there, not only that, if you're a child, I mean, that's going to be scary. I mean, that's going to be foreign to you. So it's unfortunate, but I kind of agree with what you're saying. But I did think that if you, and I know that people have felt this way seeing the movie, I just couldn't do it. But if you can take yourself out of this is Nicolas Cage, it's probably going to be a lot more effective for you. I just couldn't do it. Like it was Nick Cage giving a decent performance, but just that's just what I saw, and we'll talk a little bit about the kind of scary factor in this movie, and I don't necessarily know that, which is ironic that the Longlegs character is necessarily at the pinnacle of that to begin with, but we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to spoilers. All right, before we go to spoilers, is overhype a thing in your opinion? Was this movie
Oh,
overhyped in your opinion?
I don't think this movie was. I had gotten really hyped up for this movie, but I don't know, maybe for lack of a better word, luckily, by the time I got around to see it, I saw the cinema score, which is not good for this
No.
movie. I saw the Rotten Tomatoes audience score, which is okay, but nowhere near the critic score. So I went into it starting to think like, all right, maybe this isn't going to be the greatest thing I've ever seen. Maybe this is going to be a very divisive movie that runs hot and cold, and we'll see how it feels. So when I went into it, I had tempered myself somewhat. I also did a really good job of, aside from posters and stuff like that, I never saw a trailer for this movie. I never
Okay,
saw a lot of the
that's good.
promotional material because I wanted to go in as blind as I could. But like I said, I did end up seeing some stuff on like, people's scores. I saw a website that I respect the opinion of, and they gave it like a 6.5 out of 10. So I had really started tempering myself, and I do think that helped somewhat. If I had gone into this thinking, oh man, scariest film of the decade and Nicolas Cage with the performance of a lifetime, I bet my score would be lower than a 6. I'd
You know,
probably have disliked it more.
and what's interesting in that, to touch on what you said there too, that critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, for example, a lot of those critics were able to give their reviews and put out their score before a lot of this stuff started to hit, before the hype. They were people that kind of created the hype,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was, inadvertent or whatever, but that's just kind of how it happened. I mean, and then Neon kind of bought into a lot of those critics, uh, pull quotes like, oh, okay, we're going to lean into the scary factor and, the Nicolas Cage creep factor. And then they started kind of the marketing was going along with it. So by the time the audience, quote unquote, the audience saw it, that's why that score is lower, I think, because it's not living up to the expectation of what they've been seeing in popular culture. That's why I think overhype is dangerous. And I really, really tried, and we're going to get into it here in a second, but I really, really tried to just like from the first opening credits to the ending credits, how did I feel about what I saw? And that's what I'm going to try to talk to you about tonight. And that's hopefully what why my 7 out of 10 is what it is. And I'm assuming you're the same way with your 6. But we'll get into that. We're going to talk about it on the flip side of this promo break. When we come back from this promo, guys, we will be full into spoilers for Longlegs. So this is your warning. If you have not seen it yet, go ahead and come back to the rest of the episode after you've seen it. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As I said pre-break, me and my buddy Stu from Stu World Order are here talking about Long Legs, the new Oz Perkins film, and we will be discussing spoilers for the plot and everything else going forward. So once again, if you have not seen the movie, make sure you come back and listen to the rest of the episode after you have seen it, because there is a lot of stuff that I want to get into here, Stu, that is
Yeah.
definitely spoilery. So where do you want to start, man? You're the guest. 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 for me. We're pretty eye to eye for the most part. Uh, a lot of things I loved about this movie, as you said. Um, really everything in the first like 2/3 of the movie. Like I was like, this is fucking great. Now, this is a police procedural, serial killer, almost drama, honestly. But you could say serial killer thriller. I don't think there's a lot of horror in this movie. I've always hated that debate of is it horror, is it not horror. I don't like getting into that, but I don't know. It just felt more drama thriller kind of to me, and procedural. And I love that shit. Seven, I've got the poster here in my garage. I mean, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. I love that inherent kind of awkwardness and creepiness that come along with investigating crime scenes, and the aftermath of some of the crimes and stuff like that is almost just as horrific as actually watching it happen when it's done correctly from somebody like David Fincher in Seven. I think Oz did a good job here too. But where do you want to start, man? What I guess
I
why don't we talk about what we liked first? Why don't we do that?
Okay, we can talk about what we liked first. I mentioned pre-spoilers, I really liked Micah Monroe in this movie. I think she wore all of her emotions on her face and on her sleeve, and at no point in this movie did I really have to struggle with like, oh, what is she feeling? What is she thinking? Is
Right.
she scared? Is she content? I mean, she is right out there. She is great at emoting everything. She's a great lead performance for this movie, and everything involving her I thought was a star. Like she comes across at the beginning as a rookie in the FBI, somebody who's kind of brought in, doesn't really know what she's doing. She's partnered up with some guy to canvass a neighborhood to see if they found a serial killer. And you can tell like she's comfortable letting him take the lead role. And then things happen and she gets drawn into this Longlegs case, and she's just great. She's just great. She really has this air about her of somebody who's in over her head.
Yeah, and let me touch on Micah Monroe too, since we're talking about her, because she is really the heft of this movie. She really carries the majority of the film. I mean, Nicolas Cage, he's in quite a few scenes and he's the titular character, but I mean, it's her film. It's Micah Monroe's, it's Lee Harker's film. And like I said, she's basically a mirror of Clarice Starling in this movie, a young FBI agent, female, obviously, who's tracking a serial killer. What I want to say, which is going to get in, it's going to be weird because it's going to be something I love about the movie, which is her and her performance and kind of the initial direction of of Harker's character. But it's also going to lead into one of my grievances about the film because of where it ends up going, which in my opinion is nowhere. But I I when we first meet her and we're kind of introduced to her and we're getting to know her character and where she fits into the story. Oz Perkins, who wrote this too, by the way, did a phenomenal job at kind of pushing the narrative of her clairvoyance and her kind of psychic ability that the FBI they basically think she's a psychic. They give her a psychic test in the movie. There's one scene in the movie where they're trying to test if she's a psychic. And they end up saying, we'll just say that you're 50-50. Well, I can't remember what they said. But anyway, they obviously think that she's pivotal to the case because of her ability to solve this 30-year crime or find these clues to this puzzle that nobody else has been able to find in 30 years. And this rookie's able to do it. So I'm watching it. She's also a very socially awkward person. I've seen some people mention, autism and the representation there, which I don't know anybody autistic, so I can't really speak on that if that's accurate or not. But there's obviously something off about her. Like she doesn't really like being around people. She doesn't want to go into Blair Underwood's house to meet the family when he asked her to come in. Like, even her mother, she doesn't really visit. She just talks to on the phone. So she's not really good in social situations. She works all hours of the night and Um, so she's definitely a socially awkward, and there's something off about her. I just don't understand why, because I thought that was so fascinating that she has that innate ability to solve these unsolvable crimes. Like, I could buy that. Like, if she was just like a Goodwill Hunting character, right? It was just like natural. Like, I figured this shit out. I just know it because I read books all day instead of hanging out with people. You know what I mean? I just figured this shit out. But it doesn't go that way, even though he spends a pretty fair amount of time kind of laying that foundation. It doesn't end up being the case. It ends up being a lot more supernatural, a lot more surreal. And that's when it falls apart for me. Like, help me out, Stu. Like the devil stuff.
Yeah.
I
The
mean, go ahead.
I
I mean, I'm
I
assuming it bothered you as well.
Yeah, I really went into this expecting Silence of the Lambs. I was expecting a grounded, down to earth,
Yeah.
gritty thriller where we're going to find a serial killer and this character's going to use her detective skills and her FBI
Right.
training to take down the serial killer. And then you get into the third act and there's magic dolls and mysticism and psychic abilities that are never really used, but they're alluded to in the first act. And it was, I don't know. Maybe it was expectations. Maybe I shouldn't have expected anything and just, like you said, just gone in, watched the movie from beginning to end and got what the movie gave me. But I, I didn't really want anything supernatural here. Whenever you get
No.
to the big reveals about what's going on and dolls that are controlling people's minds and
Right.
making the patriarchs of families murder everybody, it was like, what? Are you
Right.
serious? This is where we're going with this? The character is this young FBI character. She's Clarice Starling, like you said, for all intents and purposes, that's who
Yeah.
she is. And then you throw her into what if Buffalo Bill was a voodoo magic man? And
Right.
it's so out of place. It took me all the way out of the movie again whenever you get to that point with those dolls. And I'm I'm guessing that Longlegs got the ability to do that from Satan. It's never quite said where
Right.
he gets the ability to make these dolls. He's a Satanist, but does he get the power from Satan? I don't know.
Yeah. They don't
I
really
didn't love
explain
it.
that
I didn't
thoroughly.
love it.
Yeah, they didn't explain that thoroughly either. My impression, and again, I may even be reaching here, but to give Oz Perkins the benefit of the doubt, my impression was that he was an agent of the devil, which is what, and we're in spoilers, so it's whatever, but it's what the mom ends up becoming as well. And then they kind of work in tandem at being agents of the devil for 30 years or whatever it is. And but but we have to kind of assume that, like, we don't, aside from a few silhouette images of what I guess is supposed to be the devil with the horns, which basically look like Black Phillip from The Witch, but
Yes. Yeah.
uh, which is fine because I love that movie. But anyway,
I was
he's
going
in
to
a
say it looked like
couple.
Mantar from the WWE.
Right, he did. Yep, he did. Um, that just the whole thing, like, Silence of the Lambs, which this movie's been compared to a lot, and I think from an aesthetic perspective, I get what they're saying, um, but not from a storytelling perspective, and not from a quality perspective. Like, and definitely not from a longevity perspective. I don't see people talking about Longlegs 40 years from now like they talk about Silence of the Lambs. Um, and that's not to take anything away from the movie. I just don't see that happening. Maybe I'll be wrong. I mean, who knows? But Silence of the Lambs, use that as an example, and you just kind of touched on it. But Clarice and even Hannibal Lecter, to a certain degree, is kind of working with her, and they have this kind of weird partnership to hunt the serial killer in the movie, the villain in the movie, which is Buffalo Bill. But that's a real dude. He's just a real creepy guy who goes to these horrific lengths because of his beliefs and because of what he wants, right? So fast forward to Longlegs, you could have, and I hate being like an armchair director. Like, let me tell you what you should have done. I'm not doing that. I mean, Oz Perkins knows what he's doing. But I'm saying I would have liked it more had it taken that approach of being grounded and being real, where you could have that same structure where Longlegs is essentially the Buffalo Bill figure. He's the guy that we're trying to get, or you could even say he might be the Hannibal Lecter figure, And maybe the Buffalo Bill person, the person actually doing the killing, is somebody else. Maybe it was the mom, or maybe it was somebody we hadn't even met until the climax. But it's people go to extreme lengths for their beliefs, for their religion. They do scary shit. Like, I'm not a religious guy. I'm not sure if you are, Stu, but I mean, all that shit kind of freaks me out, dude. Like, I mean, the whole thing is just like weird, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I agree. I
And
agree.
I'm not talking down to anybody that believes in that or is Catholic or anything. I mean, it's fine. I mean, I don't care. But for me, it's just a very eerie, weird thing, and people will do crazy things for their beliefs. So you could have used that as a foundation, and that would have been much more frightening for me personally, because when you have black fog coming out of dolls' heads and like, Satan's in the corner in the shadows, and like, I don't know, just the third act, it was just like, and they do a lot of exposition too. They have that whole thing where the mom's narrating everything that her and Longlegs have been doing, and like just feeding everything to you. It was just really it took a really disappointing turn after setting up a pretty creepy, atmospheric, unsettling film. I mean, I thought it was great until we got to that kind of reveal, and it was pretty much after she went to her mom's house that second time, because we get that awesome scene, which I did love, of the mom with the shotgun, and she comes behind the car.
Oh,
And then,
that was great, because in my theater, when they cut to that the first time, and the mom, you can tell, you can see her in the rear window. Somebody way back in the theater just audibly gasped, like,
yeah,
"Oh!"
yeah, that was a
It was
good
a great
scene.
experience in the theater because it affected the hell out of somebody.
That was a good scene, and seeing her kind of turn the heel right in front of your eyes and blow that FBI agent's head off right in front of her daughter, and that was one of the posters too, was her like being shocked by it. But from that moment forward is when I was kind of like, what the fuck? Like, what? So,
Yeah.
um, what about, so we talked about Nicolas Cage, we talked about Micah Monroe. That scene was a great scene, and it was reminiscent of an early scene in the film too, when her partner, her short-lived partner, goes to the house that she just kind of knew there's something wrong with it. And she goes to the house, and then when he opens the door, he gets his head blown off too, which was a very jarring kind of jump scare as well. What are some of the other imagery or scenes in the movie that kind of stick out to you,
Imagery
good
and
or bad?
scenes, good or bad. There were a lot of jump scares in this movie, and typically, jump scares can be the lazy director's way out making horror movies. If you're just trying to get reactions out of people and you're not really paying that much attention to the atmosphere of your movie and the environment that you're creating, you just throw in jump scares to get a reaction out of people. I will say Longlegs was jump scares done right. They were moments in the movie that really worked. There weren't a lot of those fake teases. Like, we've all seen the scenes in the movie where somebody opens a refrigerator door and you can't see what's behind it, and then they close the door and nothing's there, but the
Yeah,
music was heightening and you were expecting something. Longlegs doesn't do anything like that. It delivers on the jump scares when they're supposed to be there, and they're in moments where you really are kind of have let your guard down. You're kind of not expecting what you're about to see. So there are moments like whenever Micah Monroe's character Lee, whenever she's outside of her house because somebody has come to her house, and then she turns around and she sees Longlegs inside her house walking around.
hmm
Good scare. That was a really good scare. So there are moments like that in this movie that I wish more directors would take to heart when they're throwing jump scares haphazardly in their movie. Like, this should be a jump scare 101 movie for directors to watch.
yeah, I agree with that. It wasn't. It definitely didn't feel forced. It was very natural when it happened. Um, Lee Winnell did the Invisible Woman like 4 or 5 years ago, and he did a great job of the negative space and creating a environment of uneasiness, even though there's nothing really going on. And I did really like. You know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you, from a filmmaking perspective, I thought this was a top tier film. I thought the
Oh yeah.
cinematography was great.
Yeah.
I love the song choices of the kind of like glam rock that they use in the movie at different times. Nicolas Cage was obviously a big fan of that era. Um, but he'll do those things, and you were talking about the scene in her house where she's at her desk reading the letter that he's left there, Longlegs. And the door, did you notice the open doorway right behind her? And the way he
Mhm.
framed her
Yes.
was like we saw all this space behind her, including that doorway, and we knew that he had been in the house. So the whole time, your mind as a horror fan is telling you, well, there's going to be a walk by the doorway. Somebody's going to walk by when she's not looking or whatever. But that never happens. He just lets it linger there and lets that anxiety build for the audience. And
You
he does
took
that
the
in a lot
words
of.
out of my mouth at this point, because the next thing I was going to say is the way shots are framed in this movie. I
Mhm.
was looking everywhere except at center
Exactly.
mass. I was looking at
Exactly.
everything on the screen, expecting, like, is something going to be there? Is something going to be over there?
Hmm.
There's enough room over there that I should be looking for something. And I thought that was all
Right.
shot impeccably well.
It was, and he doesn't have to give you that payoff for it to still be effective, and he doesn't in most cases. There's another scene where she's in the library, doing that reading and studying, and it's a huge wide shot, and she's like this little person in the middle of the frame, and you have all this space around her in this kind of dimly lit library, and you don't see anything there either, but you are thinking there's got to be somebody in there, like kind of watching her or whatever, and you never find out if there is or not. And I love that ambiguity and just that the way she was framed and the use of negative space. And I mentioned the invisible woman or invisible man as a shout out too, because I thought it was done really well in that film from Winnell a few years ago as well. Um, when it comes to the opening scene, I want to ask. I want to talk about the opening and the closing, which I guess we're going to probably bitch about the closing, but we'll get there. But the opening scene in the snow, which we find out is some years earlier from the rest of the film, really. But we find that out later. How we talked about the hype already and some of our expectations, but how did you feel after that first like 5 minutes? Like, were you like, "Oh, this is my shit"?
I felt the unsettling environment that Perkins was going for. I like you really you're waiting for a lot of this movie to see Nicolas Cage because you just don't see his face. You see aspects of him, you see a corner of his face, you see just like maybe from his chin down. And I think that's what you see in the opening sequence is pretty much
Hmm.
just from
Right
his
from the nose
chin
down. Right,
down.
right, right.
Yes. And they really
I thought
do a
that was
good job.
smart though. I thought that was smart though because it does leave that kind of like desire for the audience member. Oh, I can't wait to see what he looks like, or I wonder what he's going to look like, as opposed to just kind of giving it to you. It's like
Absolutely. And
when
I have
you.
something to say about that whenever we get to that at another point.
I
But go
want I
ahead.
want you to. Well, I was going to say, and then you can go on. But I was just going to say, it's kind of like when I see, because I love a good alien invasion film, and if it's done right, it doesn't really show you the alien until like the last act, and then you kind of like, oh, that's what the fucking aliens look like. But you're always kind of wondering what are they going to look like. Like you only see their hands or like the top of their head or whatever. So I love that kind of element that he had there too. But go ahead with the Nicolas Cage kind of once you did see him. I mean, what did you think?
I don't know why was it to draw another correlation to Silence of the Lambs because I don't know what other reason it was. Why was the Longlegs character so effeminate looking and why was no attention paid to that at all? They never talk about like why he wears
I.
lipstick. They never refer to him as trans anything and it
Mhm.
felt to me almost like in 2024 are we having this male character look effeminate because that unsettles people and that almost made me feel
Mm.
like
Okay.
is there a regressive attitude to this movie that I should be more worried about than I guess I
Okay.
am? I just thought it was a weird choice. Like I said, no one references it. Like this isn't like a Buffalo Bill thing where they talk about him in Silence of the Lambs and they talk about who he is as a person and why he's
Hmm.
doing the things that he does and the tucking and the makings women's dresses and
Hmm.
everything. In this case, you just have a serial killer who just happens to be a man who looks like a woman and is clearly wearing like makeup and lipstick, but nobody says anything about it. And it felt like what I said, like, am I supposed to be unsettled because of that? Because it's 2024. That doesn't bother me.
Now here's the problem, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you. When I tell you this, if you have the same reaction I had, you'll see what I mean. But I
Okay.
actually yesterday listened to an interview with Oz Perkins,
Okay.
on the Big Picture, and he went on there, and Sean Fennessy, the host there, kind of asked him that, kind of said, what's the deal with Nicolas Cage's kind of appearance, and like, how does that tie in or whatever? I don't remember what the actual question, how it was framed, but so Oz said when he wrote this character that the Longlegs character is just a creepy loser who fell into the wrong crowd during the glam rock era, and he was obsessed with what was considered like satanic rock. So he, at some point, when he was listening to all this kind of like heavy metal, satanic music, the devil started talking to him in the songs. And he started kind of hearing that in his head. And he kind of just morphed into this weird creep, basically, that was pathetic and never had any real friends, never had any real family, no connections. It was just him and the devil, and that was kind of going on in his head. And again, this is why the break from logic to the surrealism really bothers me, because if you make that something that's known to the viewer without having to hear an interview with the filmmaker, and that's his motivation, is just that he feels like the devil is talking to him and he's doing his work, much like John Doe in Seven, then it's like, okay, this guy's a fucking weirdo. Like, let's arrest him or shoot him or get him get him out of the picture. You know what I mean? But instead, you introduce all this supernatural shit that just kind of took me out of what could have been a very interesting kind of study of this person who was broken over several years because of his lack of connection to anything other than Satan and the music that he felt like was Satan's music. So I heard Oz talking about that in an interview, and when I heard that, it kind of made sense to me. Like, because Oz even mentioned that he had failed plastic surgery, which was written into the script, that he did all these different plastic surgeries that were kind of failed, but he kept trying to make it better, and it got worse and worse. But again, they don't really mention that. It's written in the script maybe, but we only see it visually. So it leaves a lot to the audience to kind of make up how this happened. You know what I mean? And if I had not heard that interview yesterday, I would be saying exactly what you're saying. But because I heard his intention, it kind of made sense to me after the fact. Does that help you at all or no?
It helps, and I guess it fits with the musical choices that the movie has, but I don't know, I was less caught up in the music and the score of this movie than you were. I think I was less caught up in the soundtrack than what I was seeing on the screen. So I probably wasn't paying that close of attention to the fact that he was a glam rock fan. So I guess that makes sense. Yeah, but that's another one of those things where I wasn't paying attention to maybe the right aspect of the movie, and without your having heard that interview, I still wouldn't have an answer.
I wouldn't know either. That's what I'm saying. We shouldn't have to. I mean, either that's going to be a talking point for you in the film as the filmmaker, or it's not going to be. You know what I mean? And there would be no way for me to know. I mean, yes, I could tell that he had. I mean, the movie opens with, I think, a T-Rex quote from one of the T-Rex songs that are used in the film. So, I mean, obviously there's some type of influence there, and he's singing it at different times, kind of manically. So obviously he's affected by it, and it does mean something to him. It's just very abstract for us as the viewer. We're not going to be able to connect the dots with what we were given in the film, I don't think.
No, I wasn't able to. That's for bloody well sure.
No, I do want to give a huge shout out to the marketing, though. I know you said you didn't see everything, but
that was an intentional choice. I was trying not to, yeah.
Right. But starting back in February or so, they started doing these really eerie, weird little 20-second YouTube clips and like Twitter posts and the man downstairs, and it's all this weird shit. And they had, I think the very, very first one that they ever did was just an image. I don't know if you ever saw this one of like a girl's birthday party, and it was her and her parents, and it was literally just a still photo of like a Polaroid picture of them. And it was like the camera was getting closer and closer and closer to the faces in the picture, and it's a 911 call that's playing in the background. And that's it. It cuts off. It doesn't even give you the title of the movie or anything. And that was like a teaser. And they didn't even say what movie it was for. Like Reddit and everybody was going nuts, like trying to figure out what neon movie it was. And everybody's like, it must be Longlegs. No, it's Cuckoo. Like nobody knew what it was. So very ambiguous and very like purposefully withholding kind of. And I thought that all the trailers and stuff didn't really. They never really reveal Nicolas Cage until you see the movie. So You don't see the big bad here. Let me ask you about the big bad, and let's talk about the last act of the film, which I think we both are definitely down on. It's interesting to me that Nicolas Cage, as Longlegs, is obviously this grandiose performer, very memorable. Whether you liked his performance or not, it's very memorable. We talked about the look just now, and obviously his cageisms and stuff like that. His name is on the poster, Longlegs, but he's not really the villain here, right? He's kind of incidental to what ends up happening in the movie, or what's been happening the last 30 years in the movie. He's definitely uh, an agent for what's happening, but I I think the villain of the movie is the devil, right? I mean, is that what we're saying? Is that what you think as well?
That seems to be the case. Yeah, I would agree with that. And even
So,
then, even if you get past the devil, is the second tier villain of the movie Lee's mom?
right,
Like, she
right.
even seems like she's ahead of the game on where Longlegs is. Longlegs is just a guy who kind of sets mom in motion, but mom's the one who goes out and does everything.
Yeah, yeah. Especially in since because I don't know if maybe I'm forgetting it, but I don't know if they talk about how many murders or people died prior to him meeting Lee when she was a kid, or if she
Mhm.
was. I don't know. I can't remember if they talk about that or not.
I don't
I
think
do
they
know.
talk about how many were before that.
I was going to say, I do know they mentioned 30 years, and Lee's probably about 30, so maybe she was not, I think she was 9 that when
Yeah.
he met her. So maybe he had been doing it for 8 or 9 years prior to meeting her as a little girl. Um, and then, okay, so then we get all this exposition from the mom, and she blows that FBI agent's head off, which was great. I thought it was a great scene, great jump scare. And then she starts kind of narrating, and we're hearing her narrate to basically the story of Lee's life from her ninth birthday, and how Longlegs was going to spare her and her daughter if she kind of took up the mantle and helped him perform these rituals for Satan, which essentially is how all these families were dying, because he would make a doll that would uh, be a mirror image or a replica of a child in the family. And then once that doll gets into the house, the family has to let it into the house. Once it gets into the house, it is able to possess, I guess, the father, right? Or the
Yeah,
parents. I'm
typically.
not,
I think in every case it was the patriarch, unless there was an
yeah.
example I don't recall.
Yeah. I just know that the mom was a little absent minded in that last scene. So I don't know if it kind of possesses her too, but makes her more subservient, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like she
My
seemed kind
wife
of
and I
out of it.
loved that scene with Blair Underwood
You
and
did?
in the house whenever they go into the kitchen and the mom's like, "We'll be right back," and Blair Underwood's character's like, "Well, I'll be back. You'll still be in the kitchen."
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
that was the best line of the movie.
There were some weird hints of comedy throughout this movie too, which I appreciated. Like nobody talks about the fucking guy at the mental hospital with Kieran Shipka's um scene in the movie where she's the
Oh
daughter from that,
yeah.
and he's like this really gay flamboyant caretaker at this mental hospital, and he's got they're trying to figure out who came to visit her, and Micah Monroe's like, well, did you check his ID? And he's like, oh no, you know what, we should probably do that.
He's like, "That sounds like a good idea, doesn't
Yeah,
it?"
yeah, you would think we would do that or something. It was funny, but this also takes place in the '90s. It was a different time, before
Yeah.
9/11 and whatever. So security wasn't quite as tight as it is today. Um, so I'm just sitting there going, all right. I mean, I'm like, all these things are rushing through my head in the last act of the film, because this was a classic example of a movie that I went into it and I really wanted to love it. I did not want to go in this movie and be disappointed. I wanted I wanted to be one of those people that was like, oh my God, they did it again. Finally, 40 years since Buffalo Bill, they finally did it, but I can't say that. That was A. And B, I loved it. The first 2/3 of it. I was there for the first 2/3 of the movie. I was okay with Oz's obvious influence and nods to movies like that, and Seven. I mean, there's a scene where Longlegs gives himself up, turns himself in. That's Seven. I mean,
Hmm.
Kevin Spacey does that. He walks into the studio, and that kind of throws you for a loop because you think he's the, antagonist or whatever, and he's turning himself in. So all those obvious nods and stuff were there. Um, Kurosawa's Cure, which is another great film that's in the serial killer vein. You could see, kind of different influences from that as well. And I was okay with all that because filmmakers are influenced by stuff that they look up to. It's just what it is. I mean, I have no problem with people borrowing from people that they admire and stuff like that, as long as it's not a straight up ripoff, which I don't think he did in this movie. I think it was more,
No, no.
homaging and borrowing. But when he just takes that turn into the supernatural, it just fell flat for me. It just did not work for me. The last scene of the movie with Blair Underwood's family, it was predictable. Like I was like, Micah Monroe's talking to her about her birthday. Her birthday's on the 14th. They're talking about how all the kids were birthday on the 14th. It's like kind of laid out for you that it's going to end up there at some point, and it just happened to be the last scene of the movie. We can wrap up in a second. I'll let you go ahead and give your final thoughts on what you want to say if we haven't already touched on it, or anything you want to wrap up on Longlegs.
So yeah, like I said, whenever I gave my score, this is a movie of peaks and valleys for me. Like I really didn't like the third act. I really didn't like the introduction to the mysticism, but everything before, like you said, for the first two acts, I really liked this movie. I thought the atmosphere is so good. Again, it really is creepy and unnerving and enjoyable in that sense, but it just kind of evens out to a movie that's like a little bit above average for me. I don't know that I'll ever watch this again. I don't know if this is a movie that I'm going to have to show anybody. It's
Mm,
it's a good movie. Like I don't regret having seen it. I'm not mad
right.
at myself for having to go and see it, but it's fine. It's a little bit better than fine. It's I wish they hadn't cast Nicolas Cage. Like I said, his performance, it doesn't really work for this movie being him. And maybe if it was somebody else and they paid a little bit more attention to the glam rock aspects and made his physical appearance tie into that a little bit better and make more sense, I would have gotten more out of that. But I don't know,
Yeah,
just
you
as
could
it
have.
is, it's good. It's just good.
Yeah, you could have even put Nicolas Cage as the parental figure instead of having the mom. And
Yeah.
have him be like a priest instead of a nun or whatever at the end in that last part. And the dad ends up turning, you know what I mean? And I don't know, maybe that would have worked as Nicolas Cage, but having him in this very flamboyant, over the top role, which, like I said, is really kind of incidental to the plot of the movie, which is also kind of weird. Um, I don't know. It was weird because I do love Nicolas Cage so much. He's easily one of my favorite actors, really, of all time, and I don't think he gave a bad performance here. I think it's kind of like what we're both saying. It's just hard to detach yourself from, oh, that's Nick Cage playing Longlegs
Yes.
versus that's Longlegs. Do you know what I mean? So it's just tough. You've already said it, but I absolutely think Micah Monroe is a goddamn star. Holy shit! I mean, I love her and everything, and a lot of them have been in the horror genre. But I mean, It Follows, Significant Other. I mean, she just, and here too. I mean, just great performances all around. Really has. She was in The Watcher. Did you ever see that one?
Yes, I was gonna say that was her in Watcher, right? I didn't another movie that I didn't love the ending to, but she was great in.
Yeah, she's so good in it, man. And this is the first movie where she's not being followed, I guess. The Micah Monroe being followed universe is strong, but yeah. Um, but yeah, she was so good in it. I already mentioned the filmmaking. I'm not going to say anything bad about the filmmaking. For me, the only bad negatives in the film come from the kind of plot developments as we get further along in the movie. I went from more and more intrigued and more interested to less and less and less interested as we got to the end of the film. Even though there were things along the way that I really liked, different scenes and characters and stuff like that stood out to me, but I just didn't like how it kind of ended. By the way, what do you think about the ending? Because, Micah Monroe, quote unquote, saves the daughter at the end, Blair Underwood's kid. and correct me if I'm wrong, but she leaves in Longlegs' car, right? And she's like screaming in the car the same way he did in that one scene or whatever.
Yeah, I
Is
believe
that
that was his car. Yeah, that the mother had
yeah,
under a tarp in her garage.
right. So I don't know. I haven't. They've already done the ending explain things on YouTube. I haven't watched any of them yet because I wanted to review this with you first. But I'm gonna watch a couple of them because I mean, so is she like quote unquote free now, or is she like now an agent of the devil? Like I don't know. Do you take
I
anything away from that?
I never interpreted it as that now she's an agent. I just interpreted it as like, okay, now she's free and that's the end of it.
Okay.
I didn't really see this and think like, oh, that's an ending I needed explained. I just thought like, okay, she saved the daughter and
Okay.
she's driving off. I
All
mean,
right. All right.
it didn't really hammer me with
I've
anything that I
seen
thought was okay.
I've seen people speculating about it, and I kind of am
Oh,
like you. I was kind of like, oh well, that I mean, the case was over, quote unquote, solved. But I think maybe the scream and her like anger and anxiety and stuff at the end, which was juxtaposed against the rest of her character, which was very quiet and awkward and not extroverted in any way prior to that scene, really, even in the most crazy of situations. I think that she did have a realization in that scene where ever since I was 9 years old, I've basically been, living a lie. Like I basically haven't known anything about my own life or I haven't remembered because of being kind of puppeteered by the devil or whatever. Like she was probably thinking that, like, and then of course her mom, when you find that out about your mom, you're not going to take that easy, you know what I mean? So I think it was more her just kind of letting out a lot of those
yeah.
realizations and frustrations. But I've seen it speculated that if they wanted to, the story could kind of continue to where now she's in kind of in the mix. But I don't need any of that because I didn't like that angle of the story anyway. So
Yeah, no, I don't
uh,
think I need that at all. I think with everything her character had gone through, and as stoic as she was for the first, hour and 40 minutes of the movie, I think it just makes sense for her to kind of let out that primal scream because like you said, if you found out everything about your life was a lie and you found out your mom was killing people and you
right.
just watched your boss or your partner or whoever exactly Blair Underwood was to her, you just watched him kill his wife and then you had to put him down too on top of putting down your
Yeah.
mom. I think it just makes sense that you would enjoy a good yell.
You need to let out a scream. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, ironically, 7 out of 10 from me, and wrapping up, 6 out of 10 from Stu. It's a 6.5. I was going to say, ironically, so we did a Quiet Place day one, Maxine, and now Longlegs, and I had a 6, a 7, and a 6. Or no, I'm sorry, a 6, a 7, and a 7.
Mm-hmm.
So as the horror guy, I liked all those movies, but it's just funny for me to say that Longlegs is a 7 out of 10, which is a good score, and I do recommend it. But it's also one of the biggest disappointments for me this year, if that makes sense. Just because I just thought in my head with everything I'd seen, marketing posters, Nicolas Cage, like all the shit, and I like Oz's movies prior to this. I just thought this is going to be a 9 or 10 for me. I mean, I'm going to fucking love this thing. This is probably going to be
Yeah.
my top five of the year. That's what I was thinking. So for it to fall kind of middle of the road for me is somewhat of a disappointment. With that being said, I do recommend it. Anybody that likes, I will say, and Stu, I want you to back me up here. I will say, when you go see this, or if you go to see this, go in expecting a slow, kind of serial killer crime procedural film with the FBI trying to figure out these killings. If you've listened to this review and you haven't seen it, you already fucking know everything that happens. But there's supernatural elements in there too. But don't expect the scariest movie of the decade, right? I mean, I'm just going. I don't know who fucking said that. I should find who said that because they should be shot. I don't know why they said that.
No, it's not. It's an off-putting movie. I do think that there are aspects of it that did creep me out, but no, it's not the scariest movie of the decade. It's not even close.
No.
And you know what? I'll say even to what you said, there are a lot of movies that they get apologized as being a slow burn, but they're basically just a low budget movie that can't afford to make anything happen. So it's a lot of character stuff and not a lot of stuff going on. To Longlegs' credit, for the first two acts, stuff happens. Like I
Yeah.
was never bored with Longlegs.
No,
That's
me
not a
neither.
problem I would lob at this movie. It's a slow burn character driven thing, but I was never bored by it because stuff does in fact always happen.
Yeah, there's always something happening for sure, and there's something for you to pick apart. The thing with the police procedural, which I do love. I mean, we've been talking about Silence of the Lambs and Seven all night long, which were both obviously huge influences here. Those movies are great because the detectives in those films, or the FBI agents or whatever, are essentially trying to put together a puzzle to
Mhm.
solve it. And you, as the audience, inherently are doing that as well through those characters, trying to figure out how this person connects this person, where this piece goes, why did they do that. That's what really bothered me about Legs is it starts out that way, and she's doing the whole thing with the numbers and the upside down triangle, and like she's figuring all that shit out, and then all of a sudden Oz is just like, well, here it is. Here's fucking what really happened. It's none of that shit, none of that shit
Yeah.
even matters, it's just the devil doing his thing. And
Magic
that's why
dolls.
it was a bit of a letdown for me. I do recommend it, but at the same time it was a bit of a letdown. So a 7 out of 10 for me and a 6 out of 10 from our guest Stu. I love you, man. Thanks for finally coming on the show. I'm sorry it took so long to get you over here, but hey, we got to talk about Nicolas Cage a little bit, so that's great.
Yeah,
Tell
absolutely.
every
Thank you so much for having me on. I really, really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, man. Tell everybody where they can find you and your show real quick, buddy.
So the podcast is the Stu World Order, where we review random comic book based movies with our guest. It's on pretty much every podcast platform you can find. The website is swoproductions.com. We have new articles every single weekday. We have movie reviews, TV show, retrospectives, food reviews, just whatever I feel like throwing up on there on any given day. And all the socials that I'm on we are SWO Productions.
Thanks a lot, man. I'm a big fan of yours as well, and I appreciate you being here. By the way, as a comic book guy, as a superhero guy, that Captain America trailer did not look great.
Oh, you didn't
You see
think?
that?
I've seen a
I
lot
don't
of
know,
people
man.
saying it looks spy thrillery. I didn't love it, but I've seen a lot of people
Yeah,
saying
like
like it reminds them of Winter Soldier and the spy thriller aspects of it, and so people are kind of
okay, all right.
onto it. I didn't love it. I thought, we'll see what it's going to be. We'll see.
I mean, I know there were a lot of problems with the production, like COVID and the strike and whatever. So I know it's been delayed, but I mean, Falcon and Winter Soldier came out like 2 years ago, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. It's going to have its work cut out for it, but I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there, see what
The
you thought about that.
MCU's in kind of a roller coaster of good movie, bad movie, good movie, bad movie. And I think we all anticipate Deadpool and Wolverine to be a good movie, so that's not setting
I
up
hope so.
much for Captain America.
I hope so. I'll be seeing that one next week, and hopefully we'll be covering that one on the show too. I'm looking forward to that one. So, Stu, thanks so much for being here again, man. I appreciate it. That was our review of Longlegs. Next week, Nick will be back on the show, I think. If not,
Yay.
I will send Nicolas Cage to possess him. How that works, I have to check with Oz Perkins and have him do a Nick doll or something and send it over there. But we're going to be talking about Twisters with Daisy Edgar Jones and Glenn Powell. I guess a sequel to Twister. I don't same universe. I don't know. We'll have to talk about that too. But definitely, it looks like it's going to be good summertime popcorn fun. So we'll be checking that one out next week, and Nick will be back. Stu from Stu World Order has been here. We talked about Longlegs. Stu, thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you guys next week.